The rain had just begun to fall when Daniel Walker realized something in his marriage had quietly shifted. It wasn't loud or obvious, no screaming matches, no slamming doors. It was the silence that gave it away. The kind of silence that sits heavy in the air, thick with words left unspoken. For 8 years, Daniel believed he understood his wife, Emily. She had once been the kind of woman who filled a room with laughter, who would sneak up behind him while he cooked and wrap her arms around his waist. But lately, that warmth had cooled into distance. Her laughter now belonged to someone else, someone on the other side of a glowing phone screen. At first, Daniel dismissed the signs. The late-night messages, the secretive smiles, the quick motion of her fingers locking the screen whenever he entered the room. She said it was just work stress, that her boss was overbearing, her clients exhausting. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her. But then came the scent. One evening, as she returned home, Daniel leaned in to kiss her cheek and caught it. A faint trace of cologne. Not his own. Something sharp and unfamiliar. He froze for a heartbeat, and she noticed. Her smile faltered before she turned away, muttering something about a co-worker's perfume. The lie was so thin, it almost disappeared in the air between them. That night, Daniel lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. Once upon a time, that sound had brought him peace. Now it sounded like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something inevitable. His chest ached with a mixture of fear and denial. Maybe it's just a rough patch, he told himself. Every marriage has them. But deep down, a colder truth whispered, "You're losing her." The next morning, Emily left early for work, barely saying goodbye. Daniel stood by the kitchen window, watching her car disappear down the street. A storm was brewing outside, and somewhere inside him, too. He didn't know what he'd find yet or how much it would hurt, but he knew one thing for certain. Something was terribly, undeniably wrong. The following weeks unfolded like a slow, cruel game that only Emily seemed to know the rules of. Daniel could feel the walls of their home closing in with secrets. What used to be casual evenings together had turned into empty routines. Two strangers sharing the same roof, pretending not to notice the distance growing between them. Emily started dressing differently. Bolder colors, higher heels, perfume he'd never smelled before. She began going out more often, always claiming it was just drinks with co-workers or a late meeting. Her explanations sounded rehearsed, too polished, like lines she practiced in front of a mirror. Daniel wanted to ask more, but every time he opened his mouth, fear held him back. Fear of hearing the truth. At dinner, she scrolled through her phone beneath the table, smiling faintly at messages she never shared. When he asked what was so funny, she would look up with feigned surprise. "Just a meme from a friend," she'd say, locking her phone instantly. That locked screen became the symbol of everything he no longer had access to. Her thoughts, her heart, her honesty. Daniel's best friend, Mark, noticed a change in him. "Man, you look exhausted," Mark said one afternoon over coffee. Daniel sighed. "I think something's going on with Emily." Mark leaned forward. "You think she's seeing someone?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know, but my gut says yes." Mark's advice was simple but brutal. Find proof. Don't accuse her until you know. That night, Daniel sat at his desk staring at his laptop screen, the glow reflecting in his weary eyes. His hands trembled as he installed a location tracker through a shared account, a desperate move, but desperation had become his constant companion. When he finished, he closed the lid and whispered into the dark, "Please, let me be wrong." 2 nights later, Emily claimed she was going to a friend's birthday dinner. She left in a flurry of perfume and laughter, and Daniel sat on the couch, staring at her location on his phone. The blinking that was supposed to move toward her friend's neighborhood instead stopped downtown, at a hotel. His breath caught in his throat. For several minutes, he sat frozen, his heart beating so loudly it drowned out the sound of the TV. Then, like a man caught in a dream, he grabbed his car keys and drove. The city lights blurred past him as questions pounded in his head. What if it's innocent? What if she's not alone? What if this is the night everything breaks? When he reached the hotel, the truth stepped out to meet him. From a distance, he saw Emily, his wife. emerged from a car beside a tall man in a suit. They laughed as she brushed her hair back, her hand grazing his arm like she used to touch Daniel's. The man placed a hand on the small of her back as they walked inside together. Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. He stood there in the drizzle, the cold seeping through his jacket, watching the woman he loved disappear through glass doors that reflected the rain and his shattered reflection. He didn't confront her. Not that night. He simply turned and walked back to his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. His eyes burned, but no tears fell. By the time he reached home, dawn was beginning to break, a pale, indifferent light spilling through the clouds. And in that hollow silence, Daniel finally understood. The woman sleeping beside him every night was already gone. Morning arrived, pale and heavy, as if the world itself had forgotten how to shine. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. The night's events played in his mind like a cruel movie he couldn't turn off. Every laugh she shared with that man echoed louder than the thunder outside. When Emily finally walked to the front door, she looked surprised to see him awake. Her hair was slightly damp from the rain, her makeup smudged just enough to tell a story she'd never confess. "Oh, you're up early," she said casually, placing her purse on the counter. "I didn't want to wake you." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "She still thinks I don't know." "I didn't sleep much," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, a quiet storm gathering strength. Emily smiled faintly, pretending not to notice. "You should rest more. You've been working too hard lately." He almost laughed. Working too hard? If only she knew how hard he'd worked to believe in her. As she turned away, Daniel reached into his pocket and placed his phone on the table. The screen lit up with a photo, grainy, taken from across the street, but clear enough to see her and the man walking into the hotel. "Emily," he said softly. "Who's he?" She froze. Slowly, she turned around. Her face went pale. I don't know what you mean." "Don't do that," he said, his tone sharper now. "Don't lie. Not again." For a few moments, the only sound in the room was a ticking clock on the wall. Then she sighed, shoulders slumping, and looked down at the floor. "Daniel, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," he said, standing now, his voice trembling but steady. Her silence was the answer. Finally, she muttered, "It just happened, okay? I didn't mean for it to. You've been distant. We've both changed." He stared at her in disbelief. "Distant? You stopped talking to me months ago. You shut me out." She crossed her arms defensively. "You don't understand, Daniel. He makes me feel alive again. You used to, but not anymore." The words sliced through him like glass. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. "So that's it?" he asked quietly. "You found someone who makes you feel alive, so you decided to bury everything we built together?" Emily's eyes hardened. "Maybe it's for the best. Maybe we weren't meant to last forever. You'll move on. You always do." Then, with a faint smirk that sent fire through his veins, she added, "You're irreplaceable, Daniel. Never forget that." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't curse. Instead, he walked to his study, opened a drawer, and returned with a folder. He placed it gently on the table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, confused. "Divorce papers," he said simply. Her smirk vanished. "You're kidding." "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "You made your choice, Emily. Now I'm making mine." She stepped forward, her voice rising. "You can't just throw away our marriage like this." He shook his head. "I'm not throwing it away. You did that the night you walked into that hotel." For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. Her voice cracked. "Daniel, please. I made a mistake." He picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and looked at her with a calmness she didn't recognize. "No, Emily, you made a decision." Tears welled in her eyes, but he didn't move to comfort her. That part of him, the part that would have done anything to fix things, was gone. After a long, heavy silence, she whispered, "So that's it?" He nodded. "That's it." Emily grabbed her purse and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The echo lingered like a final heartbeat of a dying marriage. Daniel stood there alone, listening to the rain beating against the windows. His hands trembled slightly, not from regret, but from release. For the first time in months, the house felt quiet. Empty but honest. He whispered to himself, no one's replaceable when they finally remember their worth. The days that followed felt eerily quiet, like the stillness that lingers after storm tears through a town. Emily was gone. Her clothes, her perfume, her laughter that once filled a house, all vanished overnight. What remained was silence, and silence has a way of screaming when you're alone long enough to listen. Daniel tried to function as if everything were normal. He went to work, answered emails, smiled when people spoke to him. But at night, when he returned to the empty house, the facade crumbled. Every corner reminded him of her. The faint imprint of her head on the pillow, the wine glass still sitting in the dishwasher, her favorite mug still by the sink. He could have thrown them all away, but he didn't. Not yet. Not until the pain settled into something quieter, something he could live with. Emily didn't contact him for a week. Then, one evening, her name flashed across his phone. His chest tightened, but he didn't answer. She called again, and again. Finally, she sent a message. We need to talk. Please. He ignored it. A few days later, she appeared at his office, dressed neatly, hair perfect, makeup done just so, as if she could still control the narrative by looking the part. She smiled like nothing had happened. Daniel, she said softly, stepping closer. Can we talk? He motioned toward the hallway. There's nothing left to say. She frowned. Please, don't be like this. I made a mistake. A mistake? He repeated, bitterness edging his tone. A mistake is burning dinner, Emily. What you did was a choice. Her eyes glistened with tears. I didn't mean to hurt you. He shook his head slowly. You didn't think you'd get caught. That's not the same thing. For the first time, she had no reply. Her confident posture wilted. After a long pause, she whispered, I thought you'd fight for me. Daniel looked at her, really looked, and realized something he hadn't before. She wasn't the same woman he'd fallen in love with. The warmth, the sincerity, the laughter, all replaced by vanity and pride. I did fight for you, he said quietly, until you made it clear I was fighting alone. Her expression faltered. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor until the sound faded entirely. That night, Daniel sat on the back porch, a whiskey glass in hand, staring into the darkness. The ache was still there, but it felt different now, less like a wound and more like a scar forming over something that would eventually heal. Days turned into weeks. The divorce finalized quickly. The house that once felt like a cage began to feel like his again. He painted the walls, replaced the furniture, filled the silence with music instead of memories. Slowly, life began to shift. And then came the inevitable karma. One afternoon, Mark showed him a social media post. Emily's new relationship had ended. The man she left Daniel for had been married all along. The comments section buzzed with gossip, pity, and a quiet satisfaction Daniel couldn't help but feel. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just nodded. It always catches up, he murmured. Weeks later, Emily called again. This time, Daniel answered. Her voice trembled. Daniel, can we meet? Just for coffee? He hesitated, then agreed. Closure, he told himself. That's all it would be. When she walked in the cafe, she looked smaller somehow, tired, worn, and stripped of the arrogance she once wore like armor. She tried to smile. You look good, she said softly. I am good, he replied. She lowered her eyes. I miss you. He took a deep breath, meeting her gaze. No, Emily, you miss who I was when I still needed your approval. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she looked away, realizing there was no way back to what she destroyed. Daniel stood, placed a few bills on the table, and said quietly, Take care of yourself. As he walked out into the sunlight, he felt something lift, a weight he'd been carrying for far too long. For the first time in years, he didn't feel broken. He felt free. Behind him, Emily sat alone, staring at the door he'd walked through. This time, she was the one left watching someone else disappear. Months passed. Seasons shifted quietly outside Daniel's window. each one peeling away another layer of the man he used to be. What began as emptiness slowly turned into peace. The pain had dulled, replaced by something softer, acceptance. The first morning he woke up and didn't think of Emily felt strange, almost foreign. He brewed his coffee, opened the curtains, and realized the light seemed different, warmer somehow. He wasn't healed overnight, but healing had started quietly, like a whisper in the back of his mind. You made it. He began running in the mornings again, something he hadn't done in years. The rhythm of his footsteps became therapy, the sound of his breath a reminder that he was still alive, still moving forward. At work, he threw himself into new projects. His colleagues noticed a change, how focused, calm, and quietly confident he'd become. He smiled more now, not the polite smile he once used to hide behind, but a genuine one. And then life introduced him to someone new. Her name was Claire, a freelance photographer who'd recently moved into the office next to his. Their first meeting wasn't cinematic or dramatic. It was ordinary, almost awkward. She dropped her camera bag, and he'd helped her pick up the scattered lenses. She laughed at herself, cheeks flushed, and he remembered thinking, that laugh feels real. Over the weeks that followed, they crossed paths more often. Coffee breaks turned into conversations. Conversations turned into laughter. And laughter into something he hadn't expected to feel again. Claire was nothing like Emily. She didn't seek attention, didn't measure her worth through validation. She was steady, kind, and honest. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers. With her, Daniel felt seen, not judged. There were no games, no guarded silences, just the comfort of two people who had nothing to prove. One evening, they walked by the river after work. The sunset painted the sky in gold and crimson. Claire looked at him and said, "You seem like someone who's been through a storm, but somehow you made peace with the rain." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe I just stopped waiting for the sun to come back and learned to walk in the weather." She looked at him thoughtfully, as if understanding more than he'd said. That night, for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to hope. A year later, Daniel found himself sitting at a cafe on a quiet afternoon, his laptop open, Claire across from him editing photos. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that once felt impossible. He was reading through emails when a shadow fell across the table. He looked up, and there she was, Emily. She stood there, hesitant, clutching her purse. Time hadn't been kind to her. The sparkle in her eyes was gone, replaced by the dullness of regret. "Daniel," she said softly. "Hi." He nodded politely. "Emily." Her eyes flickered to Claire, then back to him. "You look happy." "I am," he replied simply. She swallowed hard. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I was stupid." He nodded again, calm and steady. "We both made mistakes," he said. "But we learned." She gave a small, sad smile. "You really moved on, didn't you?" Daniel glanced at Claire, who was watching quietly, then back at Emily. "Yes," he said. "I stopped trying to fix what was already broken." Emily lowered her gaze. "I thought you'd never stop loving me." Daniel's voice was gentle, but final. "I didn't stop loving you, Emily. I just started loving myself more." She looked away, blinking back tears, then turned and walked out of the cafe. Daniel watched her leave. No anger, no sorrow, just peace. That chapter had ended long ago. Claire reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You okay?" He smiled softly. "Yeah, I'm better than okay." Outside, sunlight spilled across the street, bright and warm. It felt like the world had finally exhaled, like life was quietly rewarding him for surviving what tried to break him. As they left the cafe, Daniel glanced once more at the door where Emily had stood. He wasn't angry, wasn't bitter, just grateful. Every heartbreak, every sleepless night, every tear, it all led him here, to freedom, to peace, to himself. And as he walked away hand in hand with Claire, a single thought crossed his mind, quiet but certain. She thought I'd beg her to stay, but letting her go was the best thing I ever did.